Kalen Dorn had always considered himself more an observer than a participant, a man who preferred to read between the lines of a conversation rather than thrust himself into its center. That evening, however, he found no safe corner to hide. The atrium of the Geal primacy shimmered with obsidian pillars and draped banners that carried the weight of centuries. The scent of luminous night moss hung heavy, a perfume of tradition and power. He stood at the edge of the crowd, nursing a pale glass of sparkling liquid, and quietly studied the people around him. The Geal were elegant to the point of severity, tall and lean, their movements honed like blades. Their culture was woven into posture and silence. An angle of the head meant far more than a sentence, and the twitch of an ear could speak volumes. Kalen had spent years learning to read those signs, but even now, in the midst of his practiced calm, he knew the human delegation was failing. Ambassador Ren Marlowe had said as much that morning, his voice worn from endless days of negotiations. The Geal respected only absolute self-control, and humanity's warmth, its impulsive emotions, came across as volatility. Their hosts dismissed them with barely concealed disdain. The treaty was crumbling. Kalen's eyes wandered across the polished floor until they found her, Lyra Varen. She stood beside her mother, Matriarch Celian, like a statue brought to life. Her skin was pale as ivory, her long hair a cascade of deep red that caught the light like molten copper. And then, the detail that made her otherworldly even among her own kind, a pair of fox-like ears, for the same rich crimson as her hair, twitching ever so slightly as she took in every nuance of the chamber. Her posture was flawless, her expression carved from ice. Yet Kalen could feel her attention sweeping across the hall, dissecting every gesture. When her gaze brushed the human delegation, Kalen felt it. An appraisal as sharp as a blade. He was not seen as a person, not even as an adversary. He was measured and discarded like a pawn already judged inadequate. For the briefest second her golden eyes met his, and he tasted the weight of a civilization that had endured for millennia looking down on the noisy, eager newcomers from Earth. Before Kalen could look away, the great chimes of the hall thundered through the air, silencing the murmurs. Matriarch Celian stepped forward, her voice carrying effortlessly. In the spirit of understanding, we shall honor our guests with a performance of the Kalen, a dance of memory and discipline. A ripple of excitement passed through the gathered diplomats. The Kalen was no ordinary performance. It was the Geal's purest expression of tradition, a dance that was equal parts ritual, test, and philosophy. Kalen felt a spark of curiosity. He knew the Kalen was said to be a dialogue written on the body, an unforgiving examination of willpower. The chosen nobles stepped forward to respectful applause. They paired off, bowing with calculated elegance. Kalen began to read the subtle patterns in each pairing when a sudden shift disturbed the rhythm. Ambassador Xeric of the Cathar Dominion, his chitinous bulk gleaming in the light, scuttled toward the matriarch. His mandibles clicked as the translation device rasped his words with smug condescension. Gracious matriarch, might I propose a most enlightening pairing? Let us witness a dance between old and new. Between your esteemed daughter, Lady Lyra Varen, and the human cultural specialist, Kalen Dorn. The suggestion struck like a blade across stone. A wave of shock swept the chamber. To pair the matriarch's heir with a minor human functionary was unthinkable. It was a diplomatic insult designed with surgical cruelty. If Kalen refused, humanity would appear cowardly. If he accepted, he would be humiliated before all. Ambassador Marlowe's face went pale. He opened his mouth to refuse, but Kalen moved first. He bowed, not deeply, but with calm deliberation. I would be honored. His voice was quiet, yet it carried into the silence. Marlowe shot him a look of sheer panic. The trap had been sprung. All eyes turned to Lyra. For the first time, her mask of indifference cracked. Fury flashed across her features, her ears flattening. This human had dared accept. He had dragged her into disgrace. I accept, she said, her voice sharp as ice fracturing on stone. Without another glance, she strode to the dance floor. The crowd parted, every gaze fixed on her. She moved like a predator, each step a promise of danger. Kalen followed, his expression unreadable, his body loose, ready. He knew he could not match her in skill. But perhaps skill was not the only language here. The first beat struck, a resonant drum like a heartbeat amplified through the floor. A cascade of metallic chimes followed, relentless, mathematical. Lyra moved instantly. Her hand seized his, strong, unyielding. She pulled him into the first sequence, her movements sharp and domineering. It was less a dance than an interrogation. Each step demanded an answer. Each pivot dared him to falter. She expected him to resist and fail. But Kalen did not resist. He yielded, flowing with her momentum. Where she was rigid, he was fluid. Where she lunged, he softened, redirecting the energy. His human frame, lower in balance, gave him an anchor she had not anticipated. He matched her tempo with unnerving steadiness. Her eyes narrowed. This was supposed to be her stage, her demonstration of dominance. Instead, the human was adapting, shifting her razor-edged strikes into arcs of unexpected grace. His hand pressed lightly at her back, not commanding but grounding, and the contact seared through the layers of silk between them. The Kalen began to change. The duel became a dialogue. Lyra tried to reassert her control, but Kalen was already there, anticipating, softening, weaving her aggression into something new. The crowd hushed. Dancers slowed. All eyes turned to the impossible sight at the center, a human shaping the sacred Kalen into harmony. Her composure cracked further. A purr slipped from her throat before she silenced it, horrified. And then came the final sequence, the Valkyrin, the yielding. Tradition demanded one partner force the other into symbolic submission. Lyra gathered herself, determined to end this as law dictated. She struck with lethal precision, twisting to drive him down. Kalen did not fight her force. He moved with it. In one seamless motion, he dropped low, pivoting, catching her as she fell into his embrace. One knee touched the floor, not in defeat, but as a foundation. He held her arched above him, her hair brushing the obsidian. It was not dominance. It was equilibrium, trust made visible. The music ceased. Silence thundered through the chamber. For a long, breathless moment, they remained locked in that impossible balance. Then Kalen lifted her smoothly to her feet. The hall erupted, not in polite applause, but in gasps and shouts of disbelief. Lyra's heart pounded. Rage, confusion, and something perilously close to awe battled within her. Before she could make sense of it, she seized Kalen's arm and dragged him from the floor, through a side archway, into the shadows of a private chamber. Her breath came fast. Her words were not yet formed. And then the archway darkened. Matriarch Celian entered, flanked by 2 guards, her expression carved from stone. "Do you understand what you have done?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. Lyra opened her mouth, but the words stumbled. Celian's gaze shifted between them, colder than any steel. "The Kalen is no mere performance. The final movement you performed is ancient, binding. In the eyes of Geo law, you have sealed a betrothal." The word struck like a thunderclap. Betrothal. Lyra staggered under its weight. A trap meant to humiliate the humans had instead chained her fate to one of them. And Kalen, the quiet observer, stood silent as the world shifted beneath both their feet. The silence in the chamber had weight, pressing down like a storm before it broke. Lyra's chest rose and fell with quickened breath, her ears flicking back as though denying what she had just heard. Kalen remained still, his eyes steady on hers, as if he had already accepted the burden that had been thrust upon them. "Betrothal," Lyra whispered, the word tasting like fire and ash in her mouth. "That cannot be." Matriarch Celian's gaze was unyielding. "It is law older than my reign. The final movement you performed, the act of yielding not in defeat but in balance, it binds. Every noble present witnessed it. Every ambassador saw. To deny it now would be to deny our own tradition. The Dominion would seize upon it as weakness. Kalen inclined his head respectfully. Then the Dominion's plan has failed. They sought disgrace, but instead. His words were drowned by the roar of an explosion. The far wall of the chamber disintegrated, a rain of shattered stone and molten glass spraying inward. Smoke and sparks filled the air as figures poured through the breach, shadows rimmed by the glow of nerve blades. Their segmented armor gleamed black, eyes glowing red in the dust. Cathar warriors, assassins. Celian's guards surged forward, weapons raised. But the assassins moved with a terrible single-mindedness, bypassing the matriarch, ignoring the human ambassador who had followed them in. Their blades pointed only at Lyra. Her body shifted before thought could catch up. With one motion she tore the ceremonial pin from her hair, the cascade of crimson falling loose across her shoulders. Another flick of her hand drew the blade strapped to her thigh, hidden beneath silk and formality. The sound of tearing fabric marked the end of the reception's illusions. The first assassin lunged. Lyra dropped into a crouch, her blade intercepting the sizzling arc aimed at her throat. Sparks hissed. Her counterstrike ripped across the chitin seam of its shoulder, but a second blow forced her back. Kalen did not think, he moved. An ornate table toppled beneath his shove, forming a makeshift barricade. He barked over his shoulder at Ambassador Marlowe, "Get back." But 3 Cathar vaulted around the barrier, their blades raised high. Their goal was unmistakable, end Lyra Varen, and the fragile accord would die with her. Kalen stepped in front of her, unarmed, his stance not that of a soldier but a dancer. The first assassin slashed, its blade shrieking through the air. Kalen dropped low, sliding under the strike. His hand snapped up, catching the Cathar's wrist and wrenching its momentum sideways. The creature stumbled into its comrades, tangling the attack. Lyra needed no invitation. Her blade pierced the exposed joint of the distracted warrior's neck, hot ichor spraying across her gown. She yanked free and pivoted, the rhythm of battle rising like a drumbeat in her blood. Kalen was already moving, pulling a heavy tapestry from the wall and flinging it across another attacker. The assassin thrashed, entangled, and Lyra's strike was merciless, severing its arm before driving steel into its thorax. It was like the Kalen all over again. Every motion Kalen made was in concert with hers, anticipating, shaping the fight. He never tried to take her role, he was the fulcrum around which her lethal grace spun. His presence opened paths, his movements bought her seconds. Another Cathar feinted at Kalen, only to redirect toward her. He didn't cry a warning, he simply shifted, his body colliding gently with her hip. The blade hissed through air where her throat had been. Lyra's eyes flicked to him in startled understanding, he hadn't reacted. He had predicted. Together they were a storm. She was the fire and steel, he was the rhythm and foundation. In less than a minute the chamber floor was littered with twitching bodies, their red eyes dimming. At last, the door crashed open. Captain Dreven stormed in with Geel security, weapons blazing, only to find the battle already over. He halted, taking in the sight, Lyra and Kalen, standing back to back amid the carnage, their breath ragged but their stances unbroken. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dreven's sharp voice rang out, "Secure the chamber. Drag these carrion out." His eyes lingered on Kalen, not with disdain but something colder, reluctant respect. The Cathar ambassador, Xeric, was seized in the main hall. His protests meant nothing in the face of assassins caught red-handed. The Dominion's plot had crumbled into bloodstains. In the ruins of the chamber, the chaos faded into silence. Lyra's gown was torn, streaked with alien ichor. Her hair clung wild about her face, a crimson mane. Her cheeks flushed pale pink beneath the smudge of battle. She looked like no statue now. She looked alive. Kalen flexed his arm, revealing a shallow cut along his sleeve where a blade had grazed him. Blood welled, dark and human. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, her blade now forgotten, and with a trembling hand brushed her fingers against the wound. Her touch was light, hesitant, a fragile contrast to the predator's fury she had embodied moments before. "You are injured," she murmured. "It's nothing," Kalen said, though his heart hammered. He held her gaze, refusing to let the moment scatter into formality. The golden fire in her eyes flickered. The aristocratic mask was gone, replaced by confusion, by something dangerously raw. Gratitude. Shock. And beneath it all, a stirring she could not name. She had trained her whole life to fight alone, to never trust another hand. And yet, in this battle, he had been her partner, perfectly attuned, perfectly present. He had not shielded her out of pity, nor tried to claim her victories. He had simply made himself the anchor, the rhythm, the silent ally she had never known she needed. The guards gave them space, perhaps by instinct, perhaps by order. For a few breaths, the world shrank to just the two of them, standing amid the broken stone and spilled blood. Lyra staggered back, her ears twitching in agitation. Her legs trembled. She leaned against a fractured wall, pressing a hand to her temple. Too much, the dance, the revelation of betrothal, the violence. Her body screamed rebellion against her composure. Kalen watched her quietly. He did not push, did not speak. He simply waited, steady as stone. A growl rumbled in her chest, one she couldn't suppress. Frustration burned in her cheeks, flushing them violet. Her golden eyes flared as she glared at him, the storm of her emotions finally spilling into words. "I can't walk straight after what you did." It was an accusation. A confession. A cry from a woman whose ordered world had been bent out of shape. Kalen stepped forward, his movements careful, respectful. He did not touch her. He steadied the shattered piece of furniture she leaned against, offering only his presence. "Then let me help you," he said softly. Her lips parted as if to refuse. But when he extended his arm, she hesitated only a breath before curling her fingers around his sleeve. The warmth of him bled into her trembling hand. Together, they walked from the ruined chamber, past the silent ranks of Geel guards, into a future neither had chosen but could no longer escape. The weeks that followed blurred into a storm of politics, ceremonies, and endless councils. The Cathar Dominion, their treachery undeniable, reeled under the weight of shattered alliances. Ambassador Xeric was recalled in disgrace, his dominion censured across the galactic concord. In contrast, the humans and the Geel found themselves bound closer than anyone had foreseen. The unplanned betrothal between Kalen Dorn and Lyra Varen became the centerpiece of every discussion, a symbol of unity that neither side had anticipated. Officially, it was spoken of with solemnity, with references to destiny and tradition. Privately, both Kalen and Lyra knew it had been born of chance, desperation, and a dance that should never have unfolded as it did. Yet the bond was real, carved into the bedrock of Geel custom. Lyra hated how much that bond lingered in her thoughts. In the quiet moments, away from the grand halls, she would find herself recalling the press of his hand at her back, the steady rhythm of his movements beside her, the way he had looked at her after the battle, not as a trophy or a burden, but as an equal. The memory unsettled her, gnawed at the walls of discipline she had built around her entire life. For Kalen, the days were no less disorienting. He had been trained as an interpreter of cultures, a quiet figure in the background of negotiations. Now he found himself thrust into the spotlight, paraded as the human who had not only survived the Kalen but had bound the matriarch's heir to him in an eternal vow. His name was spoken with awe or suspicion, but never indifference. When the treaty was finally signed, it bore a weight far beyond words on parchment. It was sealed by blood spilled in the antechamber and by the silent promise of a partnership forged in violence and rhythm. And so it was that Kalen brought Lyra to Earth. The shuttle descended through atmosphere heavy with untamed beauty. Lyra stood at the viewport, her fox-like ears twitching as she tried to parse the overwhelming flood of sensation. The Geel homeworld was a curated jewel, its forests sculpted, its seas charted, its weather obedient to ancient systems. Earth was chaos incarnate. The air was thick with scents, salt from oceans, damp soil, smoke from distant fires, pollen from unseen trees. To Kaelin it was home. To Lyra, it was an assault. Her hands tightened against the viewport frame, knuckles white. "It is so loud," she whispered, and she did not mean the sound. Kaelin stepped beside her, resting a gentle hand against the small of her back. The simple touch grounded her, a reminder of their unspoken language. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly until the flood became less a storm and more a tide she could endure. Their shuttle touched down not at the sterile diplomatic complexes of Geneva but on the wide green lawns of Kaelin's ancestral home. A sprawling stone and timber house stood among ancient oak trees, their branches painted with the red and gold of autumn. Smoke curled from a chimney, carrying the scent of burning wood. Waiting outside was Mara Dorn, Kaelin's mother. Her hair, streaked with silver, caught the fading sunlight. Her eyes warmed at the sight of her son, but when she looked upon Lyra, there was only gentle curiosity, not fear. "Welcome," Mara said, her voice open, free of ceremony. "We are honored to have you in our home." Lyra straightened instinctively, falling into ritual. "The honor is mine, Matron Mara," she replied, offering the Geel bow of respect. Kaelin had warned her his mother preferred informality, but old habits were not easily set aside. Mara only smiled. "Please, just Mara will do." She reached out, her gesture neither commanding nor submissive, but warm. Lyra hesitated, then inclined her head. That evening, a small gathering filled the house. Family members, a few colleagues, laughter spilling against the old stone walls. For Lyra, it was bewildering. The Geel gathered in silence, every gesture measured, every word weighted. The humans crowded close, their voices loud, their emotions naked. At one point, Kaelin's cousin Darian approached her as she studied a star chart on the wall. "It must be incredible," he said, a little too loudly, "to see all this, so different from the rocks and dust of your world." The air chilled. Lyra's golden eyes fixed on him, her expression still but deadly. "Our world," she said evenly, "is a testament to harmony with nature, not its conquest." Darian faltered, his attempt at conversation collapsing into silence. The warmth of the room seemed to freeze. Kaelin materialized beside her, one hand light upon her arm. "What Lyra means," he said smoothly, "is that Geel architecture is one of the galaxy's wonders. They weave their cities into the world itself." He turned to her, eyes soft. "And what Darian was trying to say, in his very human way, is that he's happy you're here." For a heartbeat, Lyra held Kaelin's gaze. Then the tension left her shoulders. She inclined her head to Darian, the closest she could come to apology. Later, on the balcony overlooking a valley wrapped in mist, Kaelin draped a blanket around her shoulders. The night air was sharp, filled with the scent of damp earth and burning wood. Above them, stars burned fiercely, more scattered than the ordered constellations of her world. "Your people are complicated," Lyra said softly. "We are," Kaelin admitted. He slid his arm around her waist, pulling her closer against the cold. "We feel loudly. Sometimes we speak before we think." Her lips quirked, the ghost of a smile. "That is, an understatement." She leaned against him then, her fox ears brushing his jaw, and for the first time since leaving her home, she felt something close to peace. The world was loud, chaotic, unpredictable. But with Kaelin beside her, she was beginning to find its rhythm. 2 days later, Kaelin led her into the heart of a local harvest festival. Color and chaos assaulted her senses, roasting food, laughter, the twang of wooden instruments. People pressed shoulder to shoulder, no thought to personal space. Lyra's Geel instincts screamed. She drew close to Kaelin, her spine straight, her expression aloof, but inside she was reeling. He led her into a barn where couples spun across a sawdust-strewn floor. The music was lively, melodic, joyful. Nothing like the rigid cadence of the Kaelin. What is its purpose? Lyra demanded, her eyes narrowing as she watched the dancers. A show of fitness? A dominance ritual? Kaelin laughed, warm and genuine. Its purpose is to have fun. He held out his hand. Come on, I'll show you. She resisted. But the look in his eyes, playful, insistent, drew her in. She placed her hand in his, her ears twitching nervously. There are no set forms, he explained, his lips close to her ear so she could hear over the music. You just listen. Not with your mind, with your heart. At first, she stumbled. Her steps were precise, mechanical, every move calculated as though the dance were combat drill. She faltered, frustration building. Stop thinking, Kaelin whispered, his breath warm against the fur of her ear. Feel. And then he drew her closer, guiding her not through steps but through motion, swaying with the music, letting rhythm lead. Slowly, haltingly, she let go. Her body softened, her steps loosened. She closed her eyes, leaning into him, and felt it, the joy in the music, the simple act of being. For the first time in her life, Lyra Varen laughed. Not a polite sound, not a controlled expression. A bright, unguarded laugh that startled even herself. Her fox ears twitched as her red hair fanned around her. The humans cheered as Kaelin spun her, their movements no longer alien forms but pure freedom. In that moment, they were not symbols of alliance, not heirs or diplomats. They were simply Kaelin and Lyra, caught in a dance that asked nothing but joy. The weeks of tranquility on Earth did not last. One morning, as frost still clung to the fields beyond Kaelin's ancestral home, a priority transmission reached them. The holographic display shimmered with the weary face of Ambassador Ren Marlowe. His expression was grave, his tone clipped of all ceremony. We have a problem, he said, his voice carrying the weight of looming crisis. Two problems, in fact. Lyra straightened, her fox-like ears twitching toward the sound. She had been pacing the library, restless in the stillness of Earth. At Marlowe's words, she stilled, her golden eyes narrowing. On the Geel homeworld, Marlowe continued, a powerful conservative faction has risen under Lord Varric. They contest the legitimacy of your bond, Lady Lyra. They claim that the Kaelin you shared with Kaelin was tainted, born of duress and manipulation during the Dominion's treachery. They argue that such a vow can be dissolved under ancient law. Lyra's jaw tightened. Varric, she hissed, the name a curse. She knew him well, a noble obsessed with purity of tradition, a man who believed her mother's reign too lenient, too open. He had always hungered for a chance to challenge her authority. Now he had found one. Kaelin stepped forward, his calm presence cutting through the tension. And the second problem? Marlowe exhaled. The Dominion is exploiting the unrest. They whisper in Varric's ear, promising him power if he severs the bond and breaks the alliance. Already, assassins gather in his shadow. This is not only about law, it is about war. Silence fell. Outside, wind rattled the bare branches of the oaks, scattering leaves across the frostbitten ground. Lyra turned to Kaelin, her expression hard. We must return. If Varric challenges me before the council, I cannot remain here hiding under your trees. Kaelin studied her, then nodded. Then we go together. The journey back to the Geel homeworld was heavy with unspoken fears. Lyra stood at the viewport again, but her focus was not on the stars this time. It was inward, weighing the path ahead. Her red hair caught the dim light, her fox ears twitching as if straining for truths hidden in the silence. Kaelin approached quietly. You don't have to face him alone. She did not turn. But I do. The law is not your domain. It is mine. You cannot fight tradition with reason. Perhaps not, Kaelin said softly. But you won't face it without me at your side. For a moment, her mask cracked. She glanced at him, the corner of her lips tugging upward in something too brief to be called a smile. Stubborn human, she murmured. The council chamber was vast, its ceiling supported by towering pillars etched with the history of Geel victories. Lords and ladies filled the gallery, their gazes sharp as blades. At the center stood Lord Varric, tall, austere, draped in the formal silks of his line. His eyes gleamed with triumph as he bowed stiffly to matriarch Celian. "My lady," he intoned, his voice echoing. "I bring challenge. The bond claimed by your daughter is illegitimate. It was forged under manipulation, under threat. Our ancient laws demand purity. And thus I call for its dissolution." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Celian's expression did not waver, but the flick of her tail betrayed fury. She gestured for Lyra to step forward. Lyra did, every line of her body radiating defiance. Her white skin gleamed under the chamber's light, her crimson hair flowing like fire. The fox ears atop her head tilted back, signaling her readiness to fight. "You call my bond illegitimate, Varric. But you know the truth. It was not duress. It was choice. I accepted him." Varric's lips curled into a sneer. "You were tricked. Deceived by chaos and blood. What honor is there in such a vow? If you will not admit it, then let us settle it as our ancestors decreed, by combat." The hall erupted in voices, some protesting, some cheering. The old ways were rarely invoked, but the law was clear. A combat of vows, the challenger against the bond. Celian's voice cut through the noise, sharp as glass. "So be it." The duel was set for dawn. Lyra stood in the preparation chamber, her blade laid across her knees. She traced the edge with steady fingers, but inside, a storm raged. Kalen approached quietly, his presence filling the silence. "You can't fight him alone," Kalen said. Her ears twitched in irritation. "This is my battle. My law." "And yet," Kalen replied, "our bond is both of ours. If he challenges its legitimacy, then I am part of it." She turned to him then, her eyes blazing. "You are not Geel. You cannot fight by our law." "No," Kalen admitted, "but I can stand beside you. As I did before." Her breath caught. She remembered the Kalen, the assassins, the harvest festival. Always, he had been there, steady, grounding, unyielding. Slowly, she nodded. "Then we fight together." The arena was carved from black stone, its floor marked by ancient sigils. The crowd gathered, a sea of watchful eyes. At one end stood Varric, armored and armed with a blade long enough to cleave through bone. At the other, Lyra and Kalen, side by side. The signal was given. Varric attacked with fury, his blade a storm of precise, merciless strikes. Lyra met him head-on, her own blade a blur of crimson and silver. Sparks flew with every clash. Kalen did not wield a blade, but he moved with her, his body anticipating, redirecting, creating openings. Where Varric pressed hard, Kalen shifted, unbalancing him. Where Lyra struck, Kalen made the path clear. The crowd murmured. They were not watching one warrior dominate another. They were watching a partnership, alien and human, fox-eared noble and earthborn diplomat, fighting as one. Varric roared in fury, lunging with a killing blow. Lyra caught it on her blade, but it was Kalen who moved, colliding with her hip, shifting her stance just enough. The killing strike slid wide, leaving Varric open. Lyra's counter came like lightning. Her blade pierced his shoulder, driving him to one knee. The chamber fell silent. Lyra stood over him, chest heaving, blade poised. But instead of finishing the strike, she stepped back. She reached for Kalen's hand, and together they turned to face the council. "The bond is real," Lyra declared, her voice carrying through the chamber. "Not because of law, but because we choose it. He is not Geel, but he is mine. And no tradition, no dominion whisper, no bitter lord will take that from us. The council erupted, not in protest, but in thunderous approval. Even Matriarch Celian's stern mask softened with the faintest flicker of pride. Varric, bleeding and defeated, was dragged from the chamber. The bond stood, not only by ancient law but by living choice. That night, beneath the stars of her homeworld, Lyra and Kaelin stood together on a balcony. The air smelled of moss and night-blooming flowers. She leaned against him, her fox ears twitching as the wind carried their whispers. "You lead with your shoulder again," she teased softly. He chuckled, pulling her closer. "And you still demand perfection." Her lips curved into the smallest, truest smile. Perhaps perfection is found only in imperfection. And for the first time, Lyra Varen felt that the bond she had once feared was no prison, but a door into a future both terrifying and wondrous. And that, my friends, is how a human diplomat and a Geel warrior with fox-like ears reshaped the destiny of two civilizations. What began as a trap laid in malice transformed into an alliance forged in blood, rhythm, and trust. Kaelin and Lyra stood not as symbols forced upon each other, but as partners who chose to fight side by side. Their story reminds us that sometimes the traditions meant to bind us can also set us free when reimagined with courage. Lyra's discipline met Kaelin's adaptability, and together they created something neither could have achieved alone. In the end, it wasn't the Council's laws or the Dominion's schemes that defined them, it was the quiet, steady decision to walk forward together, no matter the cost. If you've enjoyed this tale of cosmic politics, unexpected bonds, and battles fought both with blades and with dances, then don't let the story end here. Share it with someone who loves a mix of heart and high-stakes science fiction. Drop a like so more dreamers can find their way into these kinds of worlds. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because more journeys like this one are waiting, and I promise, you won't want to miss where the dance leads next.